أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're gonna get started with our check-ins. So, how are you? Overall, how did your choices today impact your mood or feelings? How do you deal with the ability to choose with the impact thereof, good or bad, in both the short and long term? In other words, how do you deal with the impact that you have based on the choices that you make, the relationship between the two? How do you deal with that? So, all these questions, inshallah. Anything else you want to talk about? So the question goes like this, or the riddle, if you may. A person reaches out to you and expresses overwhelm about feelings of inadequacy. This person has to balance between so many choices and is hoping for some clarity and ease. We, as human beings, are accountable and judged often by our decisions. In fact, the judgments over here are two kinds. There's judgment of the heart, intentions. This is from this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges. And then also the actions that we have. This is something that we have some autonomy in, or so we have some control over, some input in. And so we judge other people, for example, to determine if we want to be friends with them or not, or if we want to hang out with them or not, or whatever else, right? And we advise our kids, our family members, and so on, to pick good friends and so on. So these are external judgments, but these are not necessarily talking about this person going to Jannah or Jahannam or whatever. So it's not an internal decision necessarily, or the judgment. Just so that we are clear on what I'm talking about here. In this case, I'm talking about both. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges us, but also human beings judge us. So we are accountable by our decisions and the steps we take. So having to account for so many possible end judgments can overwhelm us when making decisions. When so much is riding on each of our decisions, every single decision we make, how can we simplify the process to avoid analysis paralysis and becoming overwhelmed as a consequence? How do we empower and be able to not guide others through these feelings? So Sitar has mentioned something about, one, but there's something else to keep in mind. So these are questions I'm priming everyone with, and then inshallah as we move forward, I want you to see if you can find answers in some of the things that we're going to watch today, and then we'll come back and reflect on these a little bit more. And for those who are new, the reason I call it a riddle, because I'm reframing the same process or the same thing in a different way. And to make it in a way it's not overwhelming and frustrating and annoying and kind of bothersome, it's more of something that we can look at in a positive light, so we can change the stigma that often gets attached to situations like this. Okay, so this is just again priming you, and then we'll come back to this after some things that we're gonna watch, inshallah. So with that, we've been talking about a lot about transformation, understanding where obstacles can happen and so on, and breaking it down into some things over here. So this is just a review slide. We are still focused on step 3. Step 0, for people who weren't here before, was to be realistic. Be realistic meaning you need to know the truths, capital T truths versus lowercase t truths. Capital T truths are the things that you know for a fact, and there is no doubt about them, and that's how it is, whether they're Islamically capital T truths or they're universally accepted as that. Okay, I'm reading some of the chat messages really quick. Yeah, when people expect us to be a certain way, it can be very difficult, yes. And then the question is, are those expectations valid or are they not? And understanding that helps us kind of sort of simplify the process a little bit, especially for public figures, yeah. Okay, the next thing is, again, this is a review slide, and we're focused on sustainable transformation. Not just any kind of transformation, but sustainable. So think about the components of motivation, the absence of which can hinder a lot of progress. We also talk about discipline. What is discipline? And this is the definition we're using over here. And then common roadblocks. And remember, we put this in months ago here, right? But a lot of the stuff that we're finding nowadays is actually highlighting the same thing over here. Okay, so with that, let us go to some brain games. Okay, can somebody pick one? Okay, so we'll do vulnerability. Now, Brene Brown, you might know her. She did a thing between, like there's a short clip on YouTube. You can find it. It's really nice. She did a differentiation between sympathy and empathy. So this is Brene Brown. Notice also, all the time whenever I share these videos, notice the date. This is from 2010. Remember, Carol Dweck's stuff was from 2014. The growth mindset presentation that she did, but her research was around the same time as this right here.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet talking to me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was getting my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired. It's why we're here. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss And she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome and one thing that you an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you their most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling. I'm not blank enough. I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in. I'm going to figure this stuff out. I'm going to spend a year. I'm going to totally deconstruct shame. I'm going to understand how vulnerability works. And I'm going to outsmart it. So I was ready. And I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well. You know this. So I could tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data. In 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is. This is how it works. I wrote a book. I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie. And I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder. And I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to a little breakdown, which actually looks more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown, my therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends are like, whoa, I wouldn't want to be your therapist. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm just saying, don't bring your measuring stick. I was like, okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue. And, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And I think I have a problem, and I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no childhood shit. I just need some strategies. Thank you. So she goes like this. And then I said, it's bad, right? She said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is gonna suck. And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest. Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what they, the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny. I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down. Asking someone out. Waiting for the doctor to call back, getting laid off, laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence, and it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in US history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's God. You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness. And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning, and then we feel vulnerable, so then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin, and it becomes this dangerous cycle. One of the things that I think that we need to think about is why and how we numb, and it doesn't just have to be addiction. The other thing we do is we make everything that's uncertain certain. Religion has gone from a belief in faith and mystery to certainty. I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. That's it. Just certain. The more afraid we are, the more vulnerable we are, the more afraid we are. This is what politics looks like today. There's no discourse anymore. There's no conversation. There's just blame. You know how blame is described in the research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort. We perfect. If there's anyone who wants their life to look like this, it would be me. But it doesn't work, because what we do is we take fat from our butts and put it in our cheeks. Which just, I hope in 100 years people will look back and go, wow. And we perfect, most dangerously, our children. Let me tell you what we think about children. They're hardwired for struggle when they get here. When you hold those perfect little babies in your hand, our job is not to say, look at her, she's perfect. My job is just to keep her perfect, make sure she makes the tennis team by 5th grade and Yale by 7th grade. That's not our job. Our job is to look and say, you know what? You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. That's our job. Show me a generation of kids raised like that and we'll end the problems I think that we see today. We pretend that what we do doesn't have an effect on people. We do that in our personal lives. We do that corporate, whether it's a bailout, an oil spill, a recall. We pretend like what we're doing doesn't have a huge impact on other people. I would say to companies, this is not our first rodeo, people. We just need you to be authentic and real and say, we're sorry, we'll fix it. But there's another way, and I'll leave you with this. This is what I have found. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful. Because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
Thoughts on this one? What do you think about this video? Any thoughts on this one? No. Yeah. I liked how you used vulnerable twice. The way she spoke about vulnerability was amazingly vulnerable. In the context of a society where everyone is sort of judged singularly, where everyone is feeling that they must outshine everyone else, or they must be having everything, working out the right way, the best way, and so on, we can feel increasingly lonely, and also it becomes a lot harder for us to be more vulnerable. And so to contrast that a little bit, in the context of, for example, Islamic communities or Muslim communities where Islam is being implemented, we should be seeing a little bit more of cohesion. We should see more connection. We should, everyone should be working together instead of against each other. There is this competition that we have in Islam, which is very different than the competitions that you are typically accustomed to, where helping other people actually helps you succeed even more in the hereafter, or even in this world. So the way that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala designed this competition is that if you help another person win, then you also win. Whereas the other way around, the other competition is where if you help somebody else win, then it comes at your expense, like you're going to lose at the end. But what if we change that framework? What if we looked at things very differently? We said, if I help other people, if I connect with other people, if I help another person up, then I am going to not only feel good inside, but also I'm going to succeed even more. And understanding that everyone has flaws, including ourselves, and that's okay, because that's how Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, like in terms of the system we have, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala designed us by default to have choices, and choices when we don't know every detail of everything that's going on everywhere around the world or in the galaxy, let's say. If we don't know that, our choices are necessarily going to be based on limited information, so that's okay. And we're going to have contextual weaknesses and strengths and so on that other people may or may not have, and that's okay, because we are also a little bit unique in the sense that everyone comes with different sets of experiences. So just because I don't know something doesn't mean that I can't go to somebody else who might know it. Just because I know something doesn't mean another person might know it, and so on. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, now we'll switch over to Allah. But before we switch over, I just want you to start thinking about the implications of having choice. And when people focus a lot on freedom of choice, for example, how does that impact overall societies and so on? Just some things to keep in mind. Go ahead. Let's see.
I'm going to talk to you about some stuff that's in this book of mine that I hope will resonate with other things.
Now notice that this is 2005, so that's like 16 years ago. You can also probably see some of the low quality here, but just keep this in mind.
That you've already heard, and I'll try to make some connections myself in case you miss them. But I want to start with what I call the official dogma. The official dogma of what? The official dogma of all Western industrial societies. And the official dogma runs like this. If we are interested in maximizing the welfare of our citizens, the way to do that is to maximize individual freedom. The reason for this is both that freedom is in and of itself good, valuable, worthwhile, essential to being human, and because if people, then each of us can act on our own to do the things that will maximize our welfare, and no one has to decide on our behalf. The way to maximize freedom is to maximize choice. The more choice people have, the more freedom they have, and the more freedom they have, the more welfare they have. This, I think, is so deeply embedded in the water supply that it wouldn't occur to anyone to question it. And it's also deeply embedded in our lives. I'll give you some examples of what modern progress has made possible for us. This is my supermarket, not such a big one. I want to say just a word about salad dressing. 175 salad dressings in my supermarket. If you don't count the 10 extra virgin olive oils and 12 balsamic vinegars you could buy to make a very large number of your own salad dressings in the off chance that none of the 175 the store has on offer suits you. So this is what the supermarket is like. And then you go to the consumer electronics store to set up a stereo system, speakers, CD player, tape player, tuner, amplifier, and in this one single consumer electronics store, there are that many stereo systems. We can construct 6.5 million different stereo systems out of the components that are on offer in one store. You got to admit that's a lot of choice. In other domains, the world of communications, there was a time when I was a boy when you could get any kind of telephone service you wanted as long as it came from Ma Bell. You rented your phone, you didn't buy it. One consequence of that, by the way, is that the phone never broke. And those days are gone. We now have an almost unlimited variety of phones, especially in the world of cell phones. These are cell phones of the future. My favorite is the middle one, the MP3 player, nose hair trimmer, and creme brulee torch. And if by some chance you haven't seen that in your store yet, you can rest assured that one day soon you will. And what this does is it leads people to walk into their stores asking this question. And do you know what the answer to this question now is? The answer is no. It is not possible to buy a cell phone that doesn't do too much. So, in other aspects of life that are much more significant than buying things, the same explosion of choice is true. In healthcare, it is no longer the case in the United States that you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you what to do. Instead, you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, well, we could do A or we could do B. A has these benefits and these risks. B has these benefits and these risks. What do you want to do? And you say, Doc, what should I do? And the doc says, A has these benefits and risks, and B has these benefits and risks. What do you want to do? And you say, if you were me, Doc, what would you do? And the doc says, but I'm not you. And the result is, we call it patient autonomy, which makes it sound like a good thing. But what it really is a shifting of the burden and the responsibility for decision-making from somebody who knows something, namely the doctor, to somebody who knows nothing and is almost certainly sick and thus not in the best shape to be making decisions, namely the patient. There's enormous marketing of prescription drugs to people like you and me, which if you think about it, makes no sense at all since we can't buy them. Why do they market to us if we can't buy them? The answer is that they expect us to call our doctors the next morning and ask for our prescriptions to be changed. Something as dramatic as our identity is now become a matter of choice, as this slide is meant to indicate. We don't inherit an identity, we get to invent it, and we get to reinvent ourselves as often as we like. And that means that every day when you wake up in the morning, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. With respect to marriage and family, there was a time when the default assumption that almost everyone had is that you got married as soon as you could, and then you started having kids as soon as you could. The only real choice was who, not when, and not what you did after. Nowadays, everything is very much up for grabs. I teach wonderfully intelligent students, and I assign 20% less work than I used to, and it's not because they're less smart, and it's not because they're less diligent, it's because they are preoccupied, asking themselves, should I get married or not? Should I get married now? Should I get married later? Should I have kids first or a career first? All of these are consuming questions, and they're going to answer these questions whether or not it means not doing all the work I assign and not getting a good grade in my courses. And indeed they should. These are important questions to answer. Work. We are blessed, as Carl was pointing out, with the technology that enables us to work every minute of every day from any place on the planet, except the Randolph Hotel. There is one corner, by the way, that I'm not going to tell anybody about where the high Wi-Fi works. I'm not telling you about it because I want to use it. So what this means, this incredible freedom of choice we have with respect to work, is that we have to make a decision again and again and again about whether we should or shouldn't be working. We can go to watch our kid play soccer, and we have our cell phone on one hip, and our BlackBerry on our other hip, and our laptop presumably on our laps. And even if they're all shut off, every minute that we're watching our kid mutilate a soccer game, we are also asking ourselves, should I answer this cell phone call? Should I respond to this email? Should I draft this letter? And even if the answer to the question is no, it's certainly going to make the experience of your kid's soccer game very different than it would have been. So everywhere we look, big things and small things, material things and lifestyle things, life is a matter of choice. And the world we used to live in looked like this. That is to say, some choices, but not everything was a matter of choice. And the world we now live in looks like this. And the question is this good news or bad news? And the answer is yes. We all know what's good about it, so I'm going to talk about what's bad about it. All of this choice has two negative effects on people. One effect, paradoxically, is that it produces paralysis rather than liberation. With so many options to choose from, people find it very difficult to choose at all. I'll give you one very dramatic example of this, a study that was done of investments in voluntary retirement plans. A colleague of mine got access to investment records from Vanguard, the gigantic mutual fund company of about 1 million employees in about 2,000 different workplaces. And what she found is that for every 10 mutual funds the employer offered, rate of participation went down 2%. You offer 50 funds, 10% fewer employees participate than if you only offer 5. Why? Because with 50 funds to choose from, it's so damn hard to decide which front to choose that you'll just put it off till tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and of course tomorrow never comes. Understand that not only does this mean that people are going to have to eat dog food when they retire because they don't have enough money put away, it also means that making the decision is so hard that they pass up significant matching money from the employer. By not participating, they are passing up as much as $5,000 a year from the employer, who would happily match their contribution. So paralysis is a consequence of having too many choices, and I think it makes the world look like this. You really want to get the decision right if it's for all eternity, right? You don't want to pick the wrong mutual fund or even the wrong salad dressing. So that's one effect. The second effect is that even if we manage to overcome the paralysis and make a choice, we end up less satisfied with the result of the choice than we would be if we had fewer options to choose from. And there are several reasons for this. One of them is that with a lot of different salad dressings to choose from, if you buy one and it's not perfect, and you know what salad dressing is, it's easy to imagine that you could have made a different choice that would have been better. And what happens is this imagined alternative induces you to regret the decision you made, and this regret subtracts from the satisfaction you get out of the decision you made, even if it was a good decision. The more options there are, the easier it is to regret anything at all that is disappointing about the option that you chose. Second, what economists call opportunity costs. Dan Gilbert made a big point this morning of talking about how much the way in which we value things depends on what we compare them to. Well, when there are lots of alternatives to consider, it is easy to imagine the attractive features of alternatives that you reject that make you less satisfied with the alternative that you've chosen. Here's an example. For those of you who aren't New Yorkers, I apologize. But here's what you're supposed to be thinking. Here's this couple on the Hamptons. Very expensive real estate, gorgeous beach, beautiful day. They have it all to themselves. What could be better? Well, damn it, this guy is thinking it's August. Everybody in my Manhattan neighborhood is away. I could be parking right in front of my building. And he spends 2 weeks nagged by the idea that he is missing the opportunity day after day to have a great parking space. Opportunity costs subtract from the satisfaction we get out of what we choose, even when what we choose is terrific. And the more options there are to consider, the more attractive features of these options are going to be reflected by us as opportunity costs. Here's another example. Now this cartoon makes a lot of points. It makes points about living in the moment as well, and probably about doing things slowly. But one point it makes is that whenever you're choosing one thing, you're choosing not to do other things, and those other things may have lots of attractive features, and it's going to make what you're doing less attractive. Third, escalation of expectations. This hit me when I went to replace my jeans. I wear jeans almost all the time. And there was a time when jeans came in one flavor, and you bought them, and they fit like crap, and they were incredibly uncomfortable. And if you wore them long enough and washed them enough times, they started to feel okay. So I went to replace my jeans after years and years of wearing these old ones, and I said, I want a pair of jeans. Here's my size. And the shopkeeper said, do you want slim fit, easy fit, relaxed fit? You want button fly or zipper fly? You want stone washed or acid washed? Do you want them distressed? Do you want boot cut? Do you want tapered? Blah, 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 on and on. He went. My jaw dropped. And after I recovered, I said, I want the kind that used to be the only kind. He had no idea what that was. So I spent an hour trying on all these damn jeans, and I walked out of the store, truth, with the best fitting jeans I had ever had. I did better. All this choice made it possible for me to do better. But I felt worse. Why? I wrote a whole book to try to explain this to myself. The reason I felt worse is that with all of these options available, my expectations about how good a pair of jeans should be went up. I had I had no particular expectations when they only came in one flavor. When they came in 100 flavors, damn it, one of them should have been perfect. And what I got was good, but it wasn't perfect. And so I compared what I got to what I expected, and what I got was disappointing in comparison to what I expected. Adding options to people's lives can't help but increase the expectations people have about how good those options.
Just a note over here, maybe you're finding a lot of parallels in things that we see around us, but the last points that you mentioned, just think about them a little bit more. About, we look at things, we look at what people have, and then our expectations for ourselves increase, for example. You can see why social media can be like that, right? You can see why watching something on TV or following celebrities or whatever, why that can have a negative impact potentially if we're not careful. And how Islam, for example, provides practical, powerful alternatives that simplify choices and make it easy for us to focus on the things that are important, priorities, and so on.
Options will be, and what that's going to produce is less satisfaction with results, even when they're good results. Nobody in the world of marketing knows this, because if they did, you wouldn't all know what this was about. The truth is more like this. The reason that everything was better back when everything was worse is that when everything was worse, it was actually possible for people to have experiences that were a pleasant surprise. Nowadays, the world we live in, we affluent, industrialized citizens, with perfection, the expectation, the best you can ever hope for is that stuff is as good as you expect it to be. You will never be pleasantly surprised because your expectations, my expectations, have gone through the roof. The secret to happiness, this is what you all came for. The secret to happiness is low expectations.
This is important, by the way. He is making, he's framing it in a nice way, but in a comedic way. But it's important to understand over here that when we have certain expectations, really high expectations, and we plan according to those high expectations, and when those expectations are not met, and many times they're not going to be met because of the kind of expectations we end up having, then we are on the receiving end of this hurt and underwhelmed, essentially. So I had a mentor, a business mentor, where I took him as a business mentor, and he mentioned something about his business philosophy, and he said, my business motto is deliver more than you promise. So under promise a little bit, and then when the customer gets whatever it is that they're getting, you actually gave them a little bit more and they're pleasantly surprised. And from the context of relationships, if you are more in the giving thing and you don't really expect too much from the other person, or you don't expect whatever, then whenever the person does something, you can be pleasantly surprised, and you can grow in love in terms of compassion and affection and so on.
I want to say just a little autobiographical moment that I actually am married to a wife, and she's really quite wonderful. I couldn't have done better. I didn't settle. But settling isn't always such a bad thing. Finally, one consequence of buying a bad fitting pair of jeans when there is only one kind to buy is that when you are dissatisfied and you ask why, who's responsible? The answer is clear. The world is responsible. What could you do? When there are hundreds of different styles of jeans available and you buy one that is disappointing and you ask why, who's responsible? It is equally clear that the answer to the question is you. You could have done better. With 100 different kinds of jeans on display, there is no excuse for failure. And so when people make decisions, and even though the results of the decisions are good, they feel disappointed about them, they blame themselves. Clinical depression has exploded in the industrial world in the last generation. I believe a significant, not the only, but a significant contributor to this explosion of depression and also suicide is that people have experiences that are disappointing because their standards are so high, and then when they have to explain these experiences to themselves, they think they're at fault. And so the net result is that we do better in general, objectively, and we feel worse. So
now, I mentioned earlier anxiety. So this is the anticipated regret.
Let me remind you, this is the official dogma, the one that we all take to be true, and it's all false. It is not true. There's no question that some choice is better than none, but it doesn't follow from that that more choice is better than some choice. There's some magical amount, I don't know what it is. I'm pretty confident that we have long since passed the point where options improve our welfare. Now, as a policy matter, I'm almost done. As a policy matter, the thing to think about is this. What enables all of this choice in industrial societies is material affluence. There are lots of places in the world, and we have heard about several of them, where their problem is not that they have too much choice. Their problem is that they have too little. So the stuff I'm talking about is the peculiar problem of modern, affluent Western societies. And what is so frustrating and infuriating is this. Steve Levitt talked to you yesterday about how these expensive and difficult to install child seats don't help. It's a waste of money. What I'm telling you is that these expensive, complicated choices, it's not simply that they don't help. They actually hurt. They actually make us worse. If some of what enables people in our societies to make all of the choices we make were shifted to societies in which people have too few options, not only would those people's lives be improved, but ours would be improved also. This is what economists call a Pareto improving move. Income redistribution will make everyone better off, not just poor people, because of how all this excess choice plagues us. So, to conclude, you're supposed to read this cartoon and, being a sophisticated person, say, what does this fish know? You know, nothing is possible in this fishbowl. Impoverished imagination, a myopic view of the world, and that's the way I read it at first. The more I thought about it, however, the more I came to the view that this fish knows something. Because the truth of the matter is that if you shatter the fishbowl so that everything is possible, you don't have freedom, you have paralysis. If you shatter this fishbowl so that everything is possible, you decrease satisfaction. You increase paralysis and you decrease satisfaction. Everybody needs a fishbowl. This one is almost certainly too limited, perhaps even for the fish, certainly for us. But the absence of some metaphorical fishbowl is a recipe for misery and, I suspect, disaster. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we've watched both of them. What are your thoughts about this video? Maybe connecting with the other one, but also about this riddle that we had in the beginning. And you can also reflect on these check-in questions that we had earlier.
I thought that video was very interesting, and it reminded me, like when I was finishing college, I, um, I had a job offer from one company, and I was very excited, and it was the only one I had, and I knew I was going to take it. But then a different company offered me a job, and I was much more stressed and worried about picking between those two because they were very different places and stuff. So remind me of that. I'm still thinking about an answer for this, but that was just something that came to mind.
I know one of the chat messages was be very difficult for people around. Wait, 1 second. The thing was, let me see. Let me go find it really quick. Sometimes it is easier when the choice to decide something is taken away from us.
Yeah, that's true.
So if that's the only choice that you had in terms of the work, then it would be a lot easier. Okay, well, that's the only one, I'm going to do that, right? When it comes to marriage, for example, when it comes to career choices, for example, when it comes to so many other things that we have to choose between, what do you think could be done differently moving forward now that we went through what we went through today and I guess up until today? Why do you think people, and again, this is sort of in line with some of the things that we've spoken about before, when we actually looked at the neuroscience and other things related to mental health, the conditions, right? How do you think today's conversation also has a big impact in terms of this stuff? He also mentioned back 16 years ago when he was doing this, right? This was 2005, I believe. He mentioned suicide and depression rates have been going up a lot. So how can we take into account some of the things that we talked about today to account for some of those problems that we're seeing today on the rise even more?
I think you have to identify, like when you're making a decision, some of the reasons why you're making a decision aren't good reasons, and you need to identify those. Like some of them might be to impress people or something. So if you, and it could be like other reasons that aren't good, like I don't know, nothing else comes to mind, but yeah, if you can identify exactly what your needs are and what suits you the best and ignore all those other reasons to go with a different decision, then that will simplify things.
Yeah. So knowing exactly what you need, like those hard asks. Ask is ASKS. So asks, right? Hard asks. What is it that you really need? What is the bare minimum that you need? After which everything is just going to be fancy and nice and stuff, but you don't really need it. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be overwhelmed and stressed out, right? So if you have that clarity, you have that simplicity, it makes things a lot easier in terms of moving forward. So if 5 different things have those things, like, whatever your minimum requirements are, then how do you decide between those things? Or is it okay for you to just pick any of them because you've got, your bare minimum met?
The problem with just picking one of them is that you could pick one, and like when you look back at it, you realize a different choice had a little bit more to offer, and really you shouldn't look back at that. Like you're supposed to just go with your decision and accept it. But that's why we make informed decisions, because we don't want to look back and see the other option had a little bit more to offer or something.
So how do we cut that out? How do we cut that out of the equation so we don't keep going back in every choice that we make, or many of the choices that we make, and having this same regret? How could we cut that out? Using, for example, hard boundaries. Okay, I only needed these things. I got them in every choice that I could have picked from, and I picked one of them. And that's it. Everything else that everything else was offering was just extra perks that I didn't really need, and it's okay if I didn't get them. How do we accept that?
You just have to, and you just got to know that Allah put you in your position for a reason.
Yeah, and let me rephrase that. How do we put down actual hard asks, right? And not consider everything else as a potential hard ask. Because if we're looking back and regretting the things that we missed and that we would have really liked, then maybe it wasn't so much not a hard, it wasn't a soft ask, it was a hard ask, right? But if we really, at that point in time beforehand, when we were making the decision, really understood the boundaries, and we sort of said, no matter what happens in the future, I'm not going to consider anything else as like a hard ask, right? And I'm not saying like, to be too rigid and stuff where you really needed something later on, but you're not going to accept it. But just kind of just understanding, okay, well, for example, if I get a nice ocean view, for example, of my apartment, and then another one, I get a nice, I don't know, sunset view or something like that. Well, in those cases, maybe those things are just things that I'd like to have, but maybe I don't need to have, and I can find other ways to, address those things. Or maybe both of them are going to be equally okay. But maybe some days I might want an ocean view, some days I might want a sunset view. But it doesn't matter because I could probably find places like a park or maybe something else where I can do something like that. Okay, so there's one note here in the chat. Writing things down, your needs and wants, and being constantly grateful for what you have are helpful. Yeah. It's very important to differentiate between the things that you really need and the things that you want, and then accepting them and moving forward. And then also when it comes to many choices, again, if there's 10 different choices and they're all offering the same things, in terms of the needs that we have, then we can just pick one and keep moving forward. And then accept that we don't need to worry about, for example, the potential or potential opportunity cost that might plague our thinking in the future. Because we've got what we needed, and we're going to do everything else was already a perk. It was like a pleasant surprise, if you may, but it wasn't a necessity, and so I'm okay with that. For example, I'll give you a personal example. So this is me being a little bit more vulnerable, also, but I'm okay with that. But I have an old phone. It's a smartphone. It's an S4, Samsung S4, so it's about 7 years old, right? And there are some things that I'm looking at other phones and they have that are nice, right? But in this case, my need for the phone was so that I can function in certain ways. Number one, I needed to take calls. Number two, I needed to use text messaging. Number three, I needed to use the internet every once in a while for whatever it is I need to do, right? And sometimes I needed to go on, for example, YouTube or whatever else and stuff like that. And I needed to have a way to connect some of my other apps, like for example Google Drive and things like that, so I can initially just process some of those things and stuff like that. So that phone allowed me to do all those things, alhamdulillah, and that was it. So now it met my basic necessities, and so I was like, okay, I know that every single day there's a new phone that might be coming out in the market, and there's so many options and so many things that you can get from different phones and stuff like that. So at some point I thought about, years later, when my phone is was some of my needs were not being addressed as effectively as I needed them to. So I started looking at different phones. So I said, okay, which one should I pick? So then I, again, felt some of those thoughts coming in. Okay, I can get this phone and it has these perks. And, of course, they definitely meet my basic necessities, all of them. But then they also have these extra perks that I would like to have. And then this other one has a slightly different set of those things, but nonetheless, it also meets my basic necessity. So now I'm looking through and I'm seeing all of those different phones that have everything that I need, plus extra perks, but slight differences in the extra perks. So now I'm sitting here thinking, okay, which one should I get? So I'm like, you know what? I'll make this decision later. So I put it off, right? So I can personally relate to that. So, but what I'm trying to say over here is that regardless of how many people kept on telling me that I should probably upgrade my phone and so on, I stuck to my decision that the bare minimum I had is what I needed, that I needed was in this phone, and that was it. So I moved forward and I continued to go like that. Moving forward, when I may need to make that decision to switch, I would just pick from one of the choices that are available because all of them meet my requirements and I'm good with that and I can live with that. If we can accept that, we could be okay with not getting everything that everything else offers, right? If we're okay with just accepting the bare minimum needs and then being pleasantly surprised with everything else beyond that, then imagine the change, the benefit that we can have. Imagine the happiness and satisfaction that we can experience in our lives. So what is it that holds us back from accepting that? Think about those things, and maybe some of these questions can then be answered a little bit easier by understanding where a person might be coming from. Why are they stuck in terms of a certain decision, for example? Why are they not able to make certain decisions? Why are they getting overwhelmed? Why are young people during the COVID-19 pandemic, in the study that, or in the results, the data that was presented earlier, I believe in January or February of this year, meaning just a few weeks ago, they actually mentioned that, from what I recall, it was youth from ages 11 through 19, I believe. They saw an increase in depression and so on at a level that was more than the level for adults the same age, or not the same age, adults at the same time period, like the COVID-19 context. So imagine this, right? Why are people feeling this way? Is it because they have too much freedom to choose? and so they're becoming overwhelmed, and so every decision that they're making, they're second guessing themselves, and so they're never actually satisfied? Or is it something else? And if it is what we're talking about, then how can we address that? How can we help people simplify their lives? And perhaps, bi'idhnillah, go through and get some positive feelings as a consequence. Yeah, definitely, I think it is potentially peer pressure. But even peer pressure, how can we prevent that from negatively impacting us? That's a good point. And let's talk about something that can help us in terms of peer pressure. Yeah, and another point that was mentioned in there is that knowing that many choices are not permanent, right? It's not the thing about like the one he showed in the video of what he said for eternity, right? It's like the choice between two different cheeses, and he was like, for eternity, which one is it that you're gonna have? Like, which one would you like to have? So it's not like that. Some things are gonna change, and it's okay. And even istikhara, when we make istikhara, part of that is to say we're making a soft decision. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you know this is good for me, if it is good for me, then make it easy for me and let me accept it and make me at peace with it. And that's it, and keep moving forward. And if you realize that there are roadblocks or obstacles coming in, you take a step back and you change and you go with the other route. So knowing yourself, knowing your needs and accepting them and just being content with them and just holding on to them and saying, you know what, this is what I need. I'm not gonna go this way and that way. I'm getting what I want. Everything else is just extra perks, and it's nice, but I don't need it. So I'll enjoy whatever I get, and that's okay. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it's not good for me, He will show me a different route, and accepting that and moving forward still. So you never become stuck. You don't have analysis paralysis. You keep moving forward, breathing out. So how does peer pressure? How can we stop the influence of peer pressure? I sort of already kind of mentioned some of those things, and you guys already mentioned some of those things. But how do we address the issue of peer pressure? Because yes, definitely, peer pressure could be the reason why. And some of the things that we mentioned in these questions over here about other people judging us, right? And because of that, we're feeling inadequate, for example. Yeah. And notice over here, do you remember this right here? We said common roadblocks, fear of failure, fear of injury, fear of success, because you might feel like if I succeed, what are the negative consequences of that in terms of my relationships and many other things, right? Unrealistic expectations. You guys mentioned expectations. Yeah. Not having purpose or a bigger why, meaningless. So like, why am I making this decision, as opposed to like just making a decision, right? So the why could be like the needs that you have, for example, or something else, like a bigger picture of things. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I think it's hard to identify what your needs are.
You cut off. You said it's hard to identify what your needs are. When?
It's hard to like say what. I don't know. Sometimes you might not realize a need until it's too late. So
Yeah.
I think like that's an important first step, is that you have to know for sure the needs, but then there's like the pressure of not getting it all right.
So this is where you can have istikhara, right? So for example, one of the people mentioned in the chat earlier that they made istikhara recently a lot more than they might be normal, just because of maybe there are certain things that are a little bit more confusing and so on. So making more istikhara, consulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, consulting with people and so on, and just accepting what happens after you make a soft decision. Soft decision is you address your needs, right, with that decision, but at the same time, you sort of relegate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is going to be the one who's going to guide you to move forward. As in, He knows the future, so He knows those needs that you have not yet realized, and they can come, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will account for them when He guides you to the right path at the end of the day. Okay, so one of the comments is, I think that when we embrace being different, it makes decisions a bit easier, especially when we feel pressure to keep up with other people's expectations. Yes. Yeah, so we mentioned a little bit about uniqueness, that although we have similarities in terms of the kinds of things that we think about, feelings of inadequacy and so on, there are at the same time an understanding that needs to be understood here is that we all come from a different set of background experiences and so on, right? My experiences, my personal experiences, nobody else in the entire world can it can say that they have the same exact experiences, because that would mean that they had to be in my body and they had to be wherever I went, and in every scenario that I've lived and so on, they had to be in the same place, but they couldn't be because I would have seen them and they would have been me, right? So I have differences, but I also have similarities, and those differences help us appreciate a little bit about how that we don't need to be exactly the same. We don't need to be clones like in Star Wars and stuff, right? But at the same time, we understand that there are similarities in experiences that we can relate to, because fundamentally we're all human beings and we all have the same message to guide us, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, could stepping out of comfort zone be an influence? And however, as a young person, being unique could mean being picked on. Yeah, and that is something to keep in mind, that a lot of people do try to conform, but even the people that are picking on us, right? Those two people that might be on the same team, they still have differences among them. And so when a person picks on another person, remember this one rule: insecurity leads to arrogance. If a person is insecure about themselves, they're going to pick on other people. There is no need to pick on another person if you're satisfied and content with yourself. But if you're not able to accept who you are and how different you are from everyone else, then you're going to pick on other people for being different. And if we understand that rule of just how the world works, then it makes it a lot easier for us to understand that that person is actually picking on us, is actually not happy about being different themselves. And they're not happy with not having some of the things that they feel like you have. So relative to you, they actually consider themselves inferior in those qualities. So they're going to pick on you. Like the people who are really smart, for example, right? Other people might pick on them because they themselves are not smart. So they're going to try to find other flaws in them or whatever to make them look like not so perfect, because they can't really accept that they themselves are not so perfect. So they have to pick on other people in other areas to make that person look like less good, meaning character assassinate. So this is one of the flaws in logic. If you look at logic, there's like logic rules, right? And one of the flaws in logic is when a person uses character assassination. Now, of course, there are certain rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that we have to go according to. So, for example, shaitan, Iblis in this case, was obviously bad, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us those rules. So the scholars are going to say that we don't like point fingers to anybody and say this person is going to Jannah or Jahannam, whatever, unless we have a guarantee for that. For example, for Iblis, we have a guarantee, right? For Fir'aun, we have a guarantee. For all for those people, we have guarantees. But the people that we don't have guarantee for, even if they're non-Muslims, we cannot point at them and say this person is necessarily going to be like going to go to Jahannam or whatever. Okay, so these are things that we need to keep in mind. So yeah, some of these things are important, that we have to step out of our comfort zone, and it's okay. It's okay because being different is part of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed us. Part of diversity means that we can actually be more creative in terms of the solutions that we bring to the table for different problems or different things that we're trying to work on. We all want to feel a sense of belonging, so we may just follow the lead even though we're uncomfortable. Yeah. Sense of belonging is such a powerful thing. But a lot of times, and I'm agreeing with what you said. I'm just making like a connection to how like the world sometimes makes it seem like the world should work, right? Like people sometimes they make it seem like the world should work a certain way when it really doesn't. It doesn't connect with, or it doesn't resonate with our needs as human beings, and so there's flaws that happen that lead to harm and injustice and suffering and all that pain and stuff, right? So in this case, a sense of belonging doesn't come from conformity, as in like complete sort of like what's the word, where everyone is exactly the same, right? It doesn't come from being clones of other people. That's not what belonging comes. Belonging can also come from you contributing to the picture something that other people may not be able to bring to the table. Meaning, you bring you, who is a unique individual. And your perspective is necessarily different or unique to you, and nobody else can have the same set of perspectives as you do in all the things combined. So for example, you come from a certain family, you have certain parents, you know a certain lifestyle, a certain background, you have had some experiences, and you have those experiences in connection with all the other experiences you've had. So that set of experiences and understandings and all that, that set of a specific set is not replicable by anybody else out there, because everyone else has something different about their experiences and so on. So you bring a perspective that other people can. In fact, you as a human being are of value, for example, to your parents, meaning you are the child of your parents, and you have a certain purpose and belonging in their lives, and you have a certain impact in their lives, essentially, right? And that is a very different impact than your impact in somebody else's lives. So you bring unique what's the word, you bring unique you provide a unique contribution in a way that we don't really understand, or sorry, we don't really acknowledge or appreciate, but it is something that's there. Like every person has it's like we're all part of a big puzzle, and each of us is a different puzzle piece, that without one of us, necessarily some things are going to go off track. So when a person loses a family member or somebody that they cared about, it's that impact that they left behind, right? Or that they had, that when they left, or they, they left, they died, then it left like sort of like a hole in the other person's heart. But also, even if you didn't make an impact in other people's lives, directly, like it was a parent, you might have been doing something indirectly, meaning that maybe you didn't realize, or maybe other people didn't realize, but you were providing some sort of benefit without you wouldn't sustain. And I'll give you an example of what I mean over here. There was a person, one of the earlier people, righteous people, and he used to go around at nighttime, and he would give stuff to various people that he knew needed help and stuff like that. Like he would carry stuff or whatever and drop it in front of their door, and that's it. But nobody knew who he was until the day he died. And then suddenly everything stopped happening, and all those food and all those things that were being provided to those families and stuff just stopped. And when the people were washing his body, they also saw bruises and all that stuff on his back and everywhere and stuff, right? And they realized that this was that mystery man. So he was doing all of this stuff. Um, he was doing all of this stuff. Sorry. He was doing all of those things, and people didn't realize the impact, but he had an impact. Or you could be providing impact other ways. Maybe you are an employee in some company, or maybe you are a student, and some of the experiences that you have with your professor, or meaning like some of the things that the professor presents to you, and that maybe you had a facial expression, and that facial expression just really resonated with the professor, and that sparked an interest in something else, and then they got, they can help them continue their work so that they could teach other people and stuff. And these little things can have such a big impact. It's like the butterfly effect, so to speak. Anything else? Okay, so just one last thing really quick about the the leading part. So a good leader is also someone who can be a great follower, because the good leader also knows the needs of a leader, and that the ways to make things work out in an effective way, so things people can coordinate and work together effectively. And so this person can also be a great leader, and should be a great follower, and should be when the time is necessary for that. And if you notice in like companies and in sports and so on, you're going to notice that each person has a different role to play. For example, in basketball, there's a center, the person who plays that position. There's a point guard, there's shooting guard, and so on. So these are positions that are different, but they also work together as a team, and they work together. That's the important part. They bring different talents that if you can put together, you make a nice puzzle all together. So that's important over here. So sometimes you can actually be unique and different while still being part of a group for a greater purpose. and it's just a matter of accepting some of the things that otherwise hold us back. Like, for example, what another person is going to say about me and so on. If you just let go of that and say, no, what is it that I'm going to bring to the table, and what is it that I value and so on, if you focus on those things, then it makes it a little bit easier. And those things should be things that are not necessarily connected to people, because people sometimes are going to be happy with you unjustly, or they're going to be happy with you justly, or they're going to be unhappy with you unjustly, and sometimes you're going to be unhappy with you justly. So sort of like, it's like sort of gambling with people. So we don't need to fully put all our eggs in that one basket. Kind of offset the risk a little bit. Okay, so with that, continue to think about these things. Think about how these impact people around us, how we can make a difference in these, in terms of helping other people and so on. Just overall, reflect on these, and inshallah, we will continue, maybe not with these, but something similar, or maybe something different next time. But we'll go from there, inshallah. So I hope today's session was useful and effective. And with that, inshallah, if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and pause. Give me 1 second, really quick. I'm just seeing something. Yeah. So there was something that was mentioned about how sometimes the interactions that, or sometimes being in a masjid, for example, where accepting the variety of unique set of norms, right, can become sometimes an obstacle, and how we can an obstacle in terms of becoming or to encourage or facilitating or developing confident individuals and communities. So we should probably have something like this that addresses this and kind of reframes the whole thing compared to how it might be perceived in a toxic way in many societies or cultures, or whatever. So I think that's a great idea, and if anybody's interested, we can go ahead and collaborate in that, inshallah. And you can just connect with me. You can reach out to me. I'm going to mention my contact information here. And anytime you like to collaborate, inshallah, we can collaborate. I do often collaborate with the imams in various projects, so we can also discuss that with them, inshallah. And like, these are imams from the various masajid, so we can definitely coordinate something with them, inshallah, and also youth leaders around the area. So if either of those things work, then we can do that, inshallah. And we also have connections elsewhere in terms of other people, like mental health professionals and things like that. Maybe we can have a joint session or something like that, or something that we can do to help with those things, inshallah. So I'm sharing my information right now, and anybody who would like to connect and collaborate and coordinate, I think this is a great idea, inshallah. We can definitely do that. Bi-idhnillah. Okay, if there's nothing else, or even if you have something, inshallah, you can, if you have something separately later on, you can, use my contact information, connect with me. But if there's nothing else right now, then we can go ahead and close, inshallah. And anybody who would like to access the previous presentations, so I think we've done about, I think today is the 59th session altogether, because we did 51, and then we had, I think, 8 more sessions that we did before we reframed it into challenge accepted. First it was growth through struggle, and then we wanted to have it so people can understand like transformation, so we reframed it, and then that's where the numbering starts, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if you would like those recordings, we do have them on YouTube. I believe on the ICM YouTube channel. There are a lot. I think most of them are on there. I don't know how far back they are, or how far behind the live sessions they are, because it takes some time to process and so on, and then they get uploaded. So it might be a few sessions behind on the YouTube. but yeah, you can definitely check them out over there, inshallah. So we went through different things. In the beginning, I was presenting a little bit more about some overall just sort of like frameworks, mindset, how brain works, and so on, and how perceptions work, how biases work, and stuff. Then we transitioned a little bit, into the other steps. We looked at some of these things, like the step 0, step 1, and 2, and then we spent a lot of time on step 3 because this is where pretty much the main stuff happens and stuff, right? And then we went from there. And I've been using different resources. Recently, I've been spending a little bit more focus on TED Talks. We did also do some crash course videos, but we like to discuss and kind of. Okay, so yeah, if there's any other questions or comments, we can go ahead and connect, inshallah. So you just you can message me, or you can message Sister Tara. She's also helping organize this, so you can reach either of us, inshallah, and we can go from there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا. And actually, one more thing before I stop the recording, I just thought of it. So there were some mentions about religion and some other things in the videos today. I didn't comment on those things, but because there were some things that she was mentioning, like Brene Brown mentioned about religion being so fixed, and sort of like restrictive. So I didn't comment on that because I think it might have been clear that she wasn't necessarily targeting a specific religion, and that's the end of it. But it was the idea that sometimes people do become black and white, where there is some room in Islam, for example, right? So this is a common issue where people get so fixated on something, where even if the scholars, actual scholars and stuff, are saying no, there is room, and there's like things that we need to consider and all that, but people are not recognizing that they're sort of limited in their understanding of Islamic framework, then it makes sense that they become like this, but it is not necessarily a good thing. And so she was just talking about the aspect of that from the way I understood it, right? Or the way at least I chose to interpret that. So that's why I didn't comment on that. And there are other things you'll see that sometimes they do mention things here and there because obviously they're not experts in deen. So I don't pause in each of those things necessarily, but I do want us to understand that I'm not ignoring it, but I am trying to say that ultimately their focus may be on a specific aspect of how things end up happening on the ground. So yes, she commented on religion, but in this case, the way I took it is that she was really targeting a specific manifestation of a misunderstanding of the general framework of a particular religion, especially Islam, and not necessarily the entire thing as a whole. And if she is talking about that, I'm choosing not to accept that because we know that's not really correct. So just keeping that in mind. Okay. And if you see something like that too, feel free to just comment on those things, inshallah, and we'll address it. I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in these things. So if there's anything that you really feel concerned about, please do address it. I'm not going to get offended at all these things because it's important to have these conversations. Okay, so now we can officially close, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا.